More about gel coat.
When the fourth round would...
Don't you call in the...
More importantly, he knew what he was talking about.
Oh, does it look good already? Okay.
Jumbo Scampi for limited.
All for a price that will make you...
How the hell am I supposed to pay?
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to People for People Radio, the voice of truth in Scotland.
Oh, I'm live. Good afternoon, folks, from my part of the world. Good evening from your part of the world, if you're in the United Kingdom or Europe. My name is Bruce MacDonald, and this is my show, Imago. And Imago is the final state of metamorphosis for an insect. I chose it for my show title as a deference to the Taoist allegory of the butterfly, human potential, coming out of the cocoon, the awakening of human consciousness to transdimensional reality, and a better and more honest and living life and love and all of those sorts of things. Had myself just a wonderful holiday season here. For those of you new to my show, I live in southern Costa Rica, in a part of the world called the Cordillera de Talamanca, the Talamanca Mountain ranges. And if you were to open up a Google Maps in this moment and you were to Google that, you would see that it's a vast swath of about 3,000 or 4,000 square kilometers of completely unexplored rainforest with mixed elevation through the mountains. One of the most rustic and perhaps the most biodiverse part of this little blue spaceship we live on. And I have the good grace to just live on the Caribbean side at the edge of the Talamancas here, which is going to factor quite significantly into my business. I built some earthbag homes and a guest home up here on the mountain. I'm about, what am I, about 700 meters above sea level, which is more than enough to get the climate change you want in the tropics. If any of you ever consider moving to the tropics, here is the soundest advice I can give you. Go into the mountains. You can always pop into your Suzuki Samurai and go to the beach. Do not buy a house at the beach. You will hate it in 6 months. But in the mountains, oh, in the nature, you're just loving it. Now, when I started this adventure about 4 years ago, well, the adventure began in Canada. I tried to build an earthbag home. I first became fascinated with easy and low knowledge home building. Low knowledge meaning anybody can do it. This is like an old cob cottage in England or Scotland. And except with a little bit of modern technique. You put the earth into a 10 by 10 weave polypropylene bag, and you tamp them and you flatten them out and you stagger them just like bricks or stones in a pyramid, and you build your walls. And then you put barbed wire in between each coursing or line of bags in a wall, and every meter you spike rebar. And you basically create an indefensible structure. This home I live in would survive a 9.2 earthquake. Everything around me would be flat on the ground, and my home would be still standing. It kind of waves with an earthquake. I was in a 6.2 last year, and the whole house just kind of dances a little bit. It's really quite remarkable. And when I came up here, my first plan in my head was an eco-village. And of course, my thinking comes out of a lot of the things that we think about in our part of the world, in free, open, uncensored, minus profanity, internet radio, where every loon in the world comes to sell their theories. And I'm the king of the loons here, so I'm no different. But really, what I wanted was a more autonomous way to live, because I believe that the change we're waiting for is in us, not in them. And the more we spend our time and our attention trying to get them to change, the more we're wasting precious time and our vital energy. Because the system is sustained by and is fed by us, the only real countermeasure to the system is to walk away. And I know that's difficult, and I know that's frightening. We're several generations into urban living now. We're several generations into the post-industrial revolution. I believe the first factory in the world was in Edinburgh, Scotland, I think in the 1870s sometime. I know. I'm off the top of my head here. Please, none of you Wikipedia historians chastise me in the chat room, please. I'm very sensitive today. And I came to the conclusion that the best life is the one that you choose and the one that gives you the most autonomy. Now, it's frightening. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a little daunting to go to a strange part of the world and to learn a new language and to learn a new way of living. And I have the added advantage of being able to work remotely. So I continue to work here in Costa Rica. I'm a technical writer with about 22 years experience in software, telecommunications, business and legal correspondence like request for proposal, proposals, and I also now do manufacturing as well, a lot of technical writing and manufacturing. And that's basically organizing a book, structuring the chapters, the flow of the content, indexing it, doing all of the diagrams, or in some cases, particularly manufacturing CAD work, and then preparing a web distribution, a PDF distribution, and a Word distribution of the documents. And that's what I do for a living, and it's a comfortable living, bringing me anywhere between, depending on the contract, $40 and $80 an hour. And so I do recognize that my situation is quite unique. But hopefully I will be able to do much better than my technical writing with the business that I'm beginning up here. So some of the things that we're going to do or that we're going to offer are, just some of the traditional tourist stuff, so you can go out on a dirt bike ride, you can go out on an ATV ride, you can spend the day horseback riding if you want. And these are things that are just based out of the main property, my home. And then we're going to have some activities that go into the jungle. I'm going to connect with people like the Pathfinder School in New Jersey, which teaches woodland survival skills. And I'm going to create programs for those kinds of people to come over here and go out into the jungle with myself and a couple native guides and live off the land for 2 or 3 days and be continually moving except when we make our camp. And this is quite something. Now, we would go in the jungle with a little bit of rock sugar, or what they call dulce over here. Basically, it's sugar cane compressed into a kind of molasses block, and then a little bit of salt and maybe a bag of coffee. And then everything else you have to find and forage. And there's all kinds of things to eat in the jungle. And there's all kinds of wild fruits and things like this. And there's a large number of people really interested in this who pay top dollar to do these sorts of things. And that's the sort of people that we want to come over here. And just people who want to hang out in the mountains here in the Talamanca for a day or two and have a nice meal. Another big thing that's changed in my life, folks, and this may offend some people listening, but after 10 years of pure vegetarianism, including no eggs, but I did eat cheese, I wasn't a vegan, I have gone back to meat eating. I have found that the meat gives me a strength that I cannot equal with a vegetarian diet. And I need to be strong up here. I need to be very, very strong up here. And the other big factor in my decision is I raise all my own meat now. So if I want beef, I go to one of my neighbors and I buy a cow in Tyre. And I get my friends together and we harvest the cow. I have a pig pen and I keep about 8 pigs at any given time. They take about 4 months to fatten up, and they live on a pure banana diet with a little bit of veterinarian cereal and some salt. And it's a beautiful pork, and it's quite an experience, and I recommend it to anybody who eats meat, that at some time in your life you harvest an animal so that you know what's going on there, and so that you feel the sacrament, because it is a very, very sacramental moment to harvest an animal. Nobody's joking, nobody's enjoying it, not everybody can do it. You know, in what we call a community over here is a barrio or a pueblo. And in my pueblo, there's only a few people that will kill a large mammal. Most people just do not have the stomach for it, even if they eat meat. I seem to be, and I don't say this with any pride, but I seem to be a natural-born killer. It doesn't affect me that much. I understand the cycle of life. I understand that things live. And what matters to me is that the quality of the life the animal has before it's harvested is as good and natural as it can be. So all of our chickens up here are free range, and all of our eggs are just natural and, you know, from the chickens. And I think I mentioned last week on my first show, which was on Wednesday, not Tuesday, that I've got a lot of food planted now, about 3 acres of food. I've got a huge garden that I have more tomatoes than I know what to do with right now. And I'm literally saucing every day. Every day I'm saucing tomatoes. And trying to keep up with this incredible amount of tomatoes that I have. And I've perfected my red tomato sauce. It's quite nice. And then I've got every vegetable that you could possibly imagine. I don't think anyone could name a vegetable I don't have in my garden. Everything from sweet beets to cucumbers to radishes, romaine lettuce, cabbage. And then I have a big, that's just my garden. And my garden is about 30 meters long and about 10 meters wide. And then I have a good part of my land. This is where the few acres are. And I planted all my own beans. So I have black beans, I have red beans, and I planted a bunch of sweet corn, and I planted a bunch of yucca. Y-U-K-A, one of nature's miracle foods. There's all kinds of miracle foods here in Costa Rica, folks. Foods that are really, really good for sustaining life. And yucca is like a potato. It's a root vegetable. Comes up in a tree branch, though, kind of a branched plant that goes a couple meters high. But it's much more nutritious than a potato. It has loads of magnesium, which is good for you in so many ways. I've been drinking completely chemical-free water for 3 years now. I have never gotten a parasite. We don't clean the water. It's moving water. It comes from a stream. And then I put it into a 1,000-liter tank, and then but before the tourists come up to meet licensing requirements, I will have to put in a water filtration system for those delicate European and North American tourists. So this is what's going on with my life, and I talk about it because It is my solution to what ails the world. I want to now spend a couple of minutes on last week's show, which was my re-entry to People for People Radio, after ending a fairly long tenure at another station. And I spoke about the world and the Trump administration and what I see as a very clear Zionist agenda that has persisted into the Trump administration. It seems very strong in both Democrat and Republican constituencies. Both of those parties seem quite dedicated to the Israeli cause. I pointed out as well that the Third Temple has in fact been built. Now, for those of you who follow this line of teaching, this is the prophecy that brings forth the Jewish Messiah. So this is something to take note of. Now, what I didn't say last week, and what I want to say this week, is that this in no way, shape, or form disparages the wisdom and the compassion and the great teachings of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I in no way wish to diminish the Jewish religion as a path to God, because it is. And we have to remember this. I've noticed as of late a growing number of YouTube channels featuring Jews advocating the dismissal or non-acknowledgement of the Zohar, the Kabbalah, and the Talmud, and advocating to other Jews that our religion comes from the prophets, and the prophets speak in the Torah. So what happened in Judaica, and the reason it's so politicized now, politicized to the point that you can't become Prime Minister of Britain or Canada or President of the United States unless you support Zionist Israel. And this is just a reality. This is not an anti-Semitic statement. I'm going out of my way to make sure my position is clearly understood. But what Judaica might be, folks, is the first postmodern religion. Postmodernism is an odd and curious thing, you know. It's thinking about thinking rather than thinking about something. It's criticizing books rather than writing books. It's the age of the footnoter, folks. That's what postmodernism is. And the rabbis are the ultimate footnoters. They're not prophets. They're not prophets in any way, shape, or form. They're priestcraft, just like the black-robed folks in the Vatican, and just like the robed folks in the caliphates, the Islamic political militancy. Now, as most people listening to People for People Radio probably know already, religion and spirituality were never meant to be politicized. They were meant to be lived on an individual by individual basis. It's a free will choice to live in the divine or to not live in the divine. And it's part of being human. And your life path unfolds as a result of the decisions that you make. So I wanted to, briefly touch upon that and remind my Jewish brothers and sisters that I do acknowledge your contribution to the great wisdom that the human race has, whether it be the Tibetan Buddhists or the Chinese Taoists or the Hindus or the Sikhs or the Northern Indian Sufi schools in Islam. We live in a rich tradition, or, of course, my native brothers and sisters with highly advanced shamans. By the way, I will be interviewing, not on air, this will be for some print material that I'm going to publish in Costa Rica, in the Quebecar tribe that lives up I used to call them Bribri, I was wrong. They're Quebecois, almost like Quebecois if you're Canadian, Quebecois. And they're an ancient people, and they go back tens of thousands of years in this part of the world. And there's a woman living at the reserve who's alleged to be anywhere between 110 and 125 years old. and she's their chief healer and medicine woman. And I will be interviewing her and trying to publish this in various publications around the world. And it's absolutely fascinating to sit with a woman who was 10 years old when World War I, if she's 110, which even the municipality and the government of Costa Rica acknowledges. The 125 may just be, I was going to say urban lore, but I guess in this case it would be jungle lore. So that's going to be very, very interesting. So just a brief note on last week's show. Now, that said, let me recap what I said last week. And that is quite simply that political Judaic nationalism in the form of Zionism in Israel is or has very quietly, without many people noticing, become a kind of little superpower unto themselves in the world. Israel has cornered the semiconductor business. That is, of course, the chip that runs your computer. So think AMD, think Intel. All of this industry was sent from the United States to Israel in the last 10 or 12 years, in very much the same way that manufacturing was distributed all around the world at the beginning of free trade. The first free trade deal being Canada and the United States in 1988, I believe. And then we went North America, NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, now the USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. If it gets ratified, it hasn't been through the two houses yet. So Israel has become a very, very powerful entity. And they don't, if what they're doing now, seem to be paying much respect to the tremendous aid that the United States has given them. Because they have been selling a lot of the technology to the Chinese and to the Russians. And by the way, Israel is a very big player in the Belt and Road Initiative with China. So what we're looking at is an economic future in which the East opens up in a big, big way. And basically it's the resurrection of the old Silk Road, one of the original trading routes, you know, for those of you who've seen Marco Polo on Netflix. So with that said, I'll move on. So this being the first show of 2019, I would like very much to begin on a very positive tone and talk about how good life can be if you have the courage to live from the inside out. Now, every person's definition of living from the inside out will be different. Some people will seek to realize a dream in the world, and it could be a lifestyle change like the one that I've made. It could be a career change. It could be anything, really. But living from the inside out is really the only way to live. And one of the reasons that we have stopped living this way is that the external imprint on human beings is so unbelievably strong right now. The external imprint could be a euphemism for programming. I certainly would not argue that. I would avoid the word programming in this show as much as possible because I'm trying to keep it positive. But we can clearly see that there is a very, very strong external imprint in the world. As well, what we're seeing, folks, is the aggregation of power into super institutions that are private sector, unregulated by any form of governance, and unaccountable to anyone because they're really too big to be contested with. So, I'll take everybody's imagination back to 2008. the first year and the first few months of the Obama administration as a horrible collapse in the housing market was handed to Barack Hussein Obama from George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld. And it was one of the worst economic crises in recent American history. It was so dire that Hank Paulson, then Secretary of the Treasury, former Goldman Sachs man, it's a revolving door between the Treasury and Goldman Sachs, folks. Another little bit of Israeli incursion into the American systems there. I don't mean to overplay that, but as the connection comes to mind, I feel compelled to say it out loud. So in my estimation, 2008 was a heist. The world got robbed. You know, we got jacked walking home from a movie. Basically is what happened. Now, the question becomes, where did that money go? Who benefited from that? That is a question I'm not sure I can answer on this show. I would say quite a bit of that money probably went back to Israel. I would also say that we never recovered from 2008. And I would remind you of what Hank Paulson said. Hank Paulson said that if the bailout was not given, if the stimulus package was not given, one moment. Seems to be some kind of vehicle trying to amble its way up my driveway here, but I don't know. Yeah, people are coming and going, folks. They get quite liquored up here on the mountain during the holidays. We have this liquor over here that they make on the mountain. Apparently, it only takes 8 days to distill, but it's made from sugarcane. I don't know the recipe yet, but they quite simply call it the bomb, la bomba, and I had a cap full of it. You know, the cap that closes a 2-liter soft drink bottle. So I don't know what that is, a quarter ounce, a third of an ounce, but very, very little, basically just to taste it. You know, I had to sit down for about an hour, and then I had diarrhea for 3 days. But it can be consumed by the liter up here on the mountain. Some pretty powerful drinking in Latin America. I mean, I've seen people, some of my neighbors can go on 7-day benders, and it's quite something to see. So I may have a guest here momentarily, but I do not know for sure. Oh, in fact I do. In fact I do. Okay, well, all right. It's my girlfriend's son and his girlfriend and some kids and some Colombians. So we'll see what we can do with that. But we're going to have a nice meal here and all that sort of stuff. So we were told that these systems were literally too big to fail, and that if the bailout was not given, there would be chaos in the streets and liquidity would dry up. Now, for those of you not versed in the vernacular of finance, liquidity means available money. It means that the bank has money to loan. Liquidity is established through a fractional reserve rate, and the fractional reserve rate now in the G7, and so if you're listening in Europe or if you're listening in North America, your fractional reserve rate is probably 1 to 20. And what that, tranquilo, so, I got my pit bull here a little. Oh, that's another thing that's changed since the last time we spoke. I used to have 2 pit bulls, 2 American Staffordshire Terriers. But I had to separate them because they killed two horses on the mountain. They're master hunters, the buggers, I'll tell you, man. And what they do is one goes in and distracts the One goes in and distracts the horse, And this is done by loud, sharp barking as close to the ear as possible. And so the level of intelligence in the hunting is, I guess it's just natural intelligence for animals, right? But you just, you would think in nature, I always thought like the mother and father wolf would teach this, and it had to be seen to be learned. But alas, I was wrong. It's innate knowledge in the animal. And when the animal is distracted trying to fend off the one pit bull that's charging and backing up and barking quite sharply as close to the ear as possible, the other one in the distraction is slipping in under the throat of a horse, will jump straight up, bite the throat, and clamp on and hang there until the horse dies. It's not a pleasant way for the horse to go. I had a lot of problems on the mountain. I had to pay money. It was quite, people were having meetings about my dogs, and ultimately they had to be separated. So I gave my female, who was the most aggressive, to my girlfriend's brother, and he lives down at the base of the mountain now, just off the highway. It's kind of funny because I live by Highway 32 in the south part of Costa Rica, and they're doing a big highway extension now. They're going from 2 lanes to 4 lanes because Costa Rica is getting busier and busier. And the Caribbean coast has a lot of really nice beaches and a very unique culture, very different than the Pacific coast. And the highway expansion has been contracted out to a Chinese company, which is another way of saying the Chinese government. And so there's all these Chinese dudes here now. And I'll tell you, aren't I the magician now with my Costa Rican friends and with a small group of the Chinese workers as I greet them in Mandarin? And it takes them about 15 seconds to orient. I'm not joking. They literally cannot believe this dude is talking to them in Mandarin in the middle of Costa Rica, in the jungle in the southern part of Costa Rica. They literally can't believe it. And then they smile because they suddenly realize that, oh my God, Chinese culture is going all around the world, and they are right. You cannot find a business. It's not as bad in Costa Rica as Panama right now. You literally can't find a business over 400 square feet not run by Chinese in the northern part of Panama now when I cross the border for my visa renewals. And that would be large restaurants, hardware stores, big grocery stores. Anything like this is all Chinese run. There's a famous little tourist island that you got to take a ferry to get to called Boca del Toro, Mouth of the Bull. And it's in northern Panama. And when you get there, like it's about a quarter Chinese now. It's really quite astounding how the Chinese are spreading out all over the world. The most adaptable and resilient people I've ever seen in my life. Okay, getting back on topic. What I want to talk about is living from the inside out and trusting yourself. Learning to trust intuition and inner guidance as we cope with the incredible external imprint that's a part of the world right now. This is the external imprint that begins at the age of 1 year old. If you're North American and your mom and dad work and you're put into daycare, that's the beginning of the social imprint, okay? And that's an institutional environment. It may be Montessori, it may be straight up finger painting daycare, but it is the beginning of an institutional environment. It's not the same thing as a longhouse in the Iroquois Nation where you would leave the children for 3 hours in the morning while you go and do something, and 2 or 3 of the mothers would take care of several dozen kids. It's not the same thing as that at all. It's bonded, it's insured, it's regulated, and the regulations are written by whom? The government. So if you don't go into daycare, if you've got one parent, the father or mother, staying at home, then the child doesn't begin institutionalization till 4 years old with junior kindergarten. And from that moment on, folks, we spend the rest of our lives in an institutional environment. And we do a lot of learning. We do a lot of learning. We do a lot of memorizing, and we do a lot of conceptualizing to have certain forced realizations in various disciplines. But most of the work is memory work. And this is the human race carrying forward its knowledge. Now, some of you may find me a complete Luddite for saying this, but I think this way of living is wrong. And I think the more you bottle up knowledge like this, the more you create an imbalance in your society. It's not that knowledge preservation is not important. It's how you preserve it. And the distinction will be in the 110-year-old Quebecor native shaman that I will be interviewing, and the modern social institutions that form our early childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, and well, quite frankly, our whole lives until we retire in the Western model. Unless you're self-employed and you're running a fruit stand in Liverpool or a fish stand in Louisiana, you're working in a structured environment. Why do I notice this so much? Why do I talk about this? Because the winds of change have brought me the ultimate contrast in my life. A completely unstructured life on this mountain. I go to bed when I want to go to bed. I get up when I want to get up. I haven't used an alarm clock in, I think the last time I used an alarm clock was, maybe December 5th when I went to the Panama border. I'll tell that story as we get on into this show. But one of the things that the institutional imprint does is it destroys the natural relationship between the inner and the outer, which is the beginning of the magical or the mystical connection between consciousness and life. This is what they're trying to teach in every religion, whether they're doing it successfully or not. It is a connection between our inner and our outer lives, where we can come to some certainty that, number one, our lives are in many ways predestined. That predestiny can be altered a little bit by free will decisions, but we're in a cooperative relationship with unseen forces, folks. Unseen forces. All of these things that the human race has talked about and annotated are not the relics of the past, which were ham-fisted hypotheses on the cartography of consciousness leading to the modern European Enlightenment of the Renaissance and our clear and rational thinking in the 21st century. Nothing could be further from the truth, and there could be no greater perversion of language than to call what's going on in the West now an enlightenment. It is anything but an enlightenment. Our enlightenment consecrates us to the factual, to the observable, to the sensory, and to the mental. It completely obfuscates and ridicules the spiritual. We live in a spiritual reality. And if you don't see that, the fault is you. Because that reality is constantly trying to communicate with you in dreams, in events, in synchronicities, in improbable coincidences, and in ways that evolve from that once you become committed to it as a contemplative or practitioner. But that's how it begins. And it's a magical relationship with life that doesn't give you all the answers. I certainly don't have all the answers. I'm not sure there is a final answer. I think the idea that there's a final answer is a construct of the mind, which is limited to the mental world and cannot go to the spiritual worlds. And this is why it's so difficult for us to communicate these things. We have become so indoctrinated, inculcated, and inoculated by the external imprint. It's an invisible brand. That's what it is, just the way we brand cattle. A rancher will brand his cattle, okay? The modern indoctrination is an invisible brand. You're being branded, okay? And then they consummate that with your birth certificate and collateralize every breath you take to borrow money in your legal name, and then hold you to the consequences of that debt, even though you really had nothing to do with the borrowing. But we live in a spiritual reality. And this is one of the things that gives people the courage to live from the inside out, is the realization that we live in a spiritual reality. And I'll give you an example that happened really recently to me, okay? Now, I don't follow astrology. I consider it to be a form of necromancy, and I don't communicate with the dead unless they have an urgent message for me, and very rarely. I certainly don't go out of my way to communicate with the dead, but they can be communicated with. I will not deny that. But the other side is constantly interacting with us, and every once in a while it just breaks the surface of the water. And in this metaphor, the surface of the water would be our reality of sense and mind. And all of a sudden, this great fish will just break the water. Usually happens at dusk if you folks live around lakes. And dawn, but the two ends of the sun. I guess that's because when the insects go closer to the water. But if you're lucky, and if you're ordained or fated to have these experiences, you'll have them. If you don't, disregard everything I say, because you're just going to drive yourself crazy not having these experiences if you believe they exist and you can't have them. And there are people who can't have them, folks. The spiritual life is as irreconcilable from the perspective of a socialist as our material life is. Some people have, some people do not have. Just as we see the material world, we also see the spiritual world. Some people are given knowledge, some people are not given knowledge. All lives are equal. You talk to the person who's given great material wealth on their deathbed and ask them what its value was, they might not have a really high opinion of it because they're now going to a place they're completely unprepared for, and they can't take any of the things that made them special in this world with them. You talk to the people of spiritual endowment, and sometimes it's much more difficult to find a stable and consistent material existence because of the incursion of the spiritual world and things that you're compelled to do in which there's no remuneration or pension. So I like to advocate balance. I consider living a human life like walking a tight wire, okay? It's something that you have to get acclimatized to. Now, I'm going to tell you a spiritual story, a story in which a human being, me, interacted with the other side. I really do it daily when I meditate, okay? I do it daily. The energy builds up on the right side of my body. There's a popping in the right ear. You go weightless and you go to another dimension. There's meditation explained to you as you get into it, folks, okay? And my meditation and my ability to go to higher states of consciousness has not at all been altered by eating meat again. So get away from these crazy ideas, okay? It just look for results. Be scientific about these things. Now, I was reading some information last week in which it was revealed to me that 90% of the world's vegans are white people of European descent. And, you know, when you look at all the crazy things going on in the world now, a lot of it's coming out of white culture. And I don't know what it is with white people. I'm a white man. How can you not be white and be Bruce Allen MacDonald? You can't not be white with an... Well, you could be, actually. Scots are very virile, and they've been all over the world, folks. and perhaps even the name MacDonald will show up in a non-white form here in Costa Rica. I don't know. But it seems to be a lot of craziness in the white race now, and there's a lot of magic being worked on the white race now. I'm not going to say where the magic's coming from. I have a strong idea, but I don't want to target anybody. But there's a lot of magic being worked on the white race now, and it's guilt magic, okay? And guilt is a form of magic. Magic is the ability to imbue people with a state of mind, even if they shouldn't be occupying that state of mind. Okay? Magic in its purest form is a distraction. Okay? So another example of magic would be how Israel has managed to become quietly a world superpower with 7 million people, 5.5 million Jewish people and 1.5 million Arab Israelis. Hola, mi amor, ¿cómo estás? Tranquilo. ¿Quieres dice aló a todo el mundo?
Mi amor, tú dices yo no entiendo en español, papi.
Todo hablas español aquí, dice aló, todo, millones de gente, todo el mundo escucha, usted dice, feliz nuevo año.
Aló, feliz año nuevo para todos.
Happy New Year to all. Thanks, babe. Okay, gracias, mi amor. I don't think she realizes that she just spoke on radio, but yeah, I think she does. But there's a lot of magic being worked on the white race now. And let me tell you, if you're not a Mason, if you're not a Kabbalist, if you're not born into one of these bloodline families, stop feeling guilty. It's always about culture, folks. It's never about race, okay? We're not allowed to talk about these things. They're considered politically incorrect. Here's another example. We got the biggest jail in Canada is in the west end of Toronto. It's called Maplehurst. Its nickname amongst the inmates is Jamaicahurst because of its, I think 1,700 people is the capacity. Of its Of its 1,700 inmates at any given time, 80% are Jamaican. Let me ask you, what do you think it's like to be a black man moving your family? Oh, hang on a sec here. Hi, Lee? 1 sec.
Also.
More about gel coat. When the fourth round would...
Don't you call in the...
Is the guy who grew up behind me from the age of 6 on... ¿Tú vas dónde? Visita a tus padres. ¿Todos? ¿Quién ven a la montaña?
Ahorita vamos a ir a Villeta Isabel.
Oh, no es Tony.
No, Tony todavía no hace nada.
Oh, yo pensé eres Tony.
No.
Es tu otra familia. Sí. Ah, okay. All right. We could have had some drama up here on the mountain. With somebody's very, very dramatic Colombian girlfriend. Colombians are a hot-blooded people, folks. Hot-blooded people. Anyways, the guy who just called me grew up behind me from the age of 6 onwards. And he's had 2 bouts of cancer. He's 53, I'm 52. And he's about 4 hours away from me in another part of Costa Rica. He's here for 10 days and we got to hook up. So that's my life. But a lot of magic's being worked on the white race right now. And I say, look, don't feel guilty. And going back to my other analogy, what would it like to be a Nigerian man with a master's degree in chemical engineering moving your beautiful family and your 2 children over to Toronto, Canada, and being besmirched by Jamaican culture because everybody thinks it's a racial issue? It's not. It's never, ever, ever, ever a racial issue. There are no racial issues on this planet. There are cultural problems on this planet. Jamaican fathers don't hang around. The men are very physically strong. They get into crime. They want easy money. They don't have proper discipline. And boom, there's your problem. The white race has been dragged into this Kabbalistic, Masonic empire, and we've been basically the foot soldiers for it. I mean, before the Jews took over England and formed the Bank of England with a knife to William the Orange's throat in 1678, the English were pretty nasty on their own, but they stayed pretty close to home, and they hammered the Irish and the Scots. And then, we were sort of beaten into subservience, and then we became the hammer of the English. All of the native butchering that went on in Canada, that was done by Scots. English don't get their hands dirty. They read plans in a tent like Caesar. And it's always about culture, folks, okay? So as we go through what's coming, don't buy into any of this bad white man bullshit. Find the Kabbalists, find the Masons, slit their throats, and be done with it. Of course, metaphorically slit their throats, shame them, and bring them out into the light. And this is going on, by the way. There's something going on in the world now where some hidden secrets are being brought forward, and people unprepared for this are just going to be absolutely and utterly shocked by the whole thing. All right, now I promised you I was going to give you a spiritual story to footnote that we live in a spiritual reality. Okay, so December 5th, I had to go for a visa renewal. I have to leave every 90 days and get a new visa. And one of the conditions for getting a new visa is that when you come back into Costa Rica from Panama, you have to be able to show them a plane ticket going back to the country of your passport. And it can be another 3 months out. But if you don't have that, they're not going to let you back into the country, because they've had problems with people coming into the country on a 3-month visa and never leaving. There's beach bums over here from the United States and California. They live at the beach. They smoke weed all day, or they surf all day, smoke weed and drink wine at night, and just sort of live this pura vida culture over here. And they're completely illegal, right? And there's quite a few of them. So one of the things you got to do is you got to show a return ticket. Now, one of the things I do is I buy my ticket at the border, right at the border. I take my cell phone to create a hotspot, and I take my ultra thin Lenovo laptop XR1. Really, it's the PC world's version of a MacBook Air. It's super thin, super powerful PC notebook. By the way, as somebody who's worked in technology for 22 years, if you're going to get a notebook, get yourself a ThinkPad, get yourself a Lenovo ThinkPad, okay? There's nothing else to say about that. Now, so moving on. So, the night of, like, you know, I got, it's like an all-day trip, right? And I got to stay one night in Panama. So I go to bed, and this would be on the 4th, because, you know, I'm leaving on the 5th. I wake up at about 4:30 in the morning with this absolutely lucid, sticky dream. When you have important dreams, folks, there'll be a texture to them that it's wherever it comes from, it sends like a wake-up message, okay? It wants you to remember the dream. Those dreams are usually important, okay? And they're usually prophetic. They're going to tell you something about your future, or you're being bothered. Entities can also do it as well, like, you know, what disincarnate entities can do it as well. So, and I've had experiences with both. But this was a prophetic dream. Now, in the dream, I'm at a shoe store at the border. And the border I cross is called Sixayola. It's like the closest border crossing to me. I mean, I could go north to Nicaragua. That would be like four hours busing. This is about 2.5, 3 hours busing. And so I have this dream that I'm buying these cowboy boots at a shoe store at the border. And I'm happy. I have them on my feet. And when I turn to walk, they're really sort of soft. I realize they're not leather. They're some kind of synthetic foam. And they fall apart on my feet. And I go back and I ask for a new pair. And I'm kind of like, oh, geez, I might be out $100 here. And I'm a little upset. And this is where the dream ends and I wake up. So what is the dream telling me? Well, you know, your footwear falling apart, your travels are not going to go well. So, and at the border, it's not going to go well. So it told me my travels were not going to go well and that I would have a problem at the border. So I knew even before I left that morning that I was going to have a problem. Okay? December 5th, for those of you getting back to the astrology, was the last day of the Mercury retrograde. Okay? So that was December 5th. So I have this dream. So I leave the mountain at 7 o'clock in the morning in my Suzuki Samurai, and my girlfriend is with me. She's going part of the way where I'm going, but not all the way. She's going to another city that I have to make a bus exchange in because all of us up on the mountain here, we're registering our land. The land up here has been unregistered for decades, and the patriarch of the mountain is 84, and he's come close to passing a few times. His blood pressure goes really low, and he can't get out of bed for a few days. So we're kind of like, this is my girlfriend's father, we're kind of like in a get your affairs in order kind of phase. So anyways, we all got our plans, And we also found out that we never should have been living here. It was designated conservation land for the Quebecor natives. And there will be no new zoning permissions given here. Nobody else can move here. How lucky am I? Seriously, how lucky am I? Okay? So, no competition on my business. There's nobody coming into the Talamanca Mountains from the Caribbean side during tourist activities. On the other side, there's all kinds of tourist activities because you can enter the Talamanca Mountains from the Pacific side as well. Costa Rica, if you look on a map, is relatively thin, folks. So the dream, my boots fall apart, bad travel, something's going to go wrong at the border. We get in the Suzuki, we're driving down the mountain at 7 in the morning. And first thing we pass, it goes right out in front of the truck, is a black cat, about 8 months old. And quite far from any farm, okay, which is unusual, very unusual, okay? So it would have been more reasonable to see like a 6-week-old kitten, right? Because that means that there was a wild litter of cats born in the jungle. But the reason I say 8 or 10 months is strange is no kitten would live that long so far from any kind of human contact up here. Okay, so it was very, very strange to see this black cat. And my girlfriend says, oh, that's odd. Okay, so we go down the mountain road about another 2 kilometers, and this is the first time this has ever happened to me living up here for a couple years now. I had to stop the car because 2 like gargantuan black vultures would not get off the road. And they weren't eating anything. It wasn't like there was some carcass at the side of the road. They were just like standing in the road. Now after this happens, my girlfriend goes into full, superstition mode. Like, Santeria kind of stuff. She says, oh, that's, okay, first the black cat, now this. She says, I don't have a good feeling about this day. I don't tell her about my dream. Do not tell her about my dream. Okay? So, I make my way by bus, and I get all the way down to 6 Aola at about 2:30 in the afternoon. And the border crossing closes at 4. I sit down at the coffee shop, and I crack open my laptop, I get a hotspot on my smartphone, and I go to Google Flights. I find a flight from San Jose to Ottawa, where my parents live in Canada. Reasonable price, like $300 one way Canadian, which is about $260 Canadian, US, I guess. Fairly cheap. I go to buy it. Visa will not verify me or check out my card. I have a Visa debit card from the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. I've been using it 4.5 years. In fact, I have to be back in Canada before June to get a new bank card because I don't rely on my Costa Rican bank accounts. So there's been no problem with this card. And just a few days before, I did an internet purchase. I like to buy knives. I'm a knife collector. And because my habit is a little compulsive, I've confined myself to one day a year, and that is Black Friday. So I bought a couple knives on Black Friday with this bank card. Nothing happened. It worked fine. I can't buy a plane ticket. So I call Air Canada. I say, what's going on here? Can I just give you my number and all the details of my card and buy it directly from you? And she says, yeah. And I say, okay. She goes to make the purchase on the phone, and it gets denied again. She says, well, you got to call your bank. So I hang up with her. I call the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. I say, what's going on with my card? I can't buy a plane ticket. She says, there's no holds on your card. You've got plenty of money to buy the ticket. I don't see a problem, Mr. MacDonald. I say, well, look, this is my situation. I am between 2 countries right now. I am like Tom Hanks in that movie, The Terminal. And I need to get out of this situation, and I can't get out of it unless I buy a plane ticket. And there's no hotels to hunker down here for the night. No hotels whatsoever. She says, oh, I appreciate your situation, Mr. MacDonald. Let's go over all your details to make sure that they're correct. So we do that. Now, when you're purchasing online, everything that you fill in has to conform to the information the bank has. So that's your address, your postal code, your date of birth, the 3-digit security number on the back of your card, all of these things, okay? The expiry date on your card. So we go through them. You know, I give my address. She said, I spell it all out. She's correct. I give my postal code. She says, correct. I give my full name and with spelling, 2 L's in the Allen, Bruce Allen MacDonald, correct. I get to my birthday. I was born July 12, 1966. She says, I have found your problem, Mr. MacDonald. Our records show that you were born on June 12th, 1966. Wow, that's a lot of sixes, eh? 6th month, 12th day, 1966. And last day of Mercury retrograde. And coming on the heels of The Dream and The Black Cat and The Two Hideous Vultures. And I'm going, okay, man, this is just the day from hell, man. This is just the day from hell. She says, I don't think we're going to be able to repair this today. And I said, well, how would my birthday get changed? You know, why would it be changed, you know? And she says, I don't know. She says, you don't have the ability to do it. You can't change our database. I said, I've been using this card for 4.5 years. I don't understand. I've never had a problem. She says, I can't explain it, Mr. MacDonald. So I make a few phone calls to Canada. I can't get anybody on the phone to buy my ticket and email it to me, because that's all I need. And, oh, by the way, I didn't tell you. What you do is you just cancel the ticket the next day. Okay, so you just cancel it, and that's how we get around the ticket thing, right? So you're allowed to cancel any airplane ticket from any airline company in 24 hours with no penalty. So a lot of us who don't have our residency in Costa Rica but who live here, this is what we do. We have to leave the country 4 times a year, and it's not bad, right? I don't mind the little vacations. I usually go to Boca del Toro and stay at a nice hotel and swim in the ocean and all that sort of stuff. I decide that this isn't going to happen, and I have to go back. Now, when I was coming to the border, our bus got stopped by the police, and everybody's identification got looked at, and the police checked my visa. Okay? And that doesn't usually happen. In fact, that's the first time it's ever happened to me in 4 years of doing visa runs from Costa Rica. Okay? So there's another bad omen. So I got to get back on the bus, and I got to go back to where I live, which is about 3 hours away. And I don't know if the police are going to stop me and see that I have an exit visa for Costa Rica, but I don't, because I paid my exit tax. You know, I don't know if you guys have ever crossed a border by land. It's not the same thing. As when you go by air, everything is done by customs in the airport. In land border crossings, you have a brief space of land between the two borders, which is referred to as a no man's land. It really is, okay? It's not the property of any country. And you have duty-free shops there and all this sort of stuff. Now, I had already crossed into that. And to cross into that, I have to get my exit visa from Costa Rica, which I got. So I'm now coming back to my home in the mountains with an exit visa in my passport from that day, with no re-entry visa. So I'm completely illegal, right? And I also had the police stop my bus on the way in. Fortunately, they did not stop the bus on the way back. And I got home. I told my girlfriend the whole story. She said, I told you. I knew as soon as we saw that black cat. I told her the dream. And then, you know, she went and told her pastor at her church, and now everybody refers to December 5th for me as El Dia del Diablo, the day of the devil for Bruce. But anyway, so you get 90 days on a visa, and I came back from visiting my parents in Ottawa for 2 months. Ottawa and Toronto I lived in for 2 months. I came back into Costa Rica on September 7th. Of the 3 months, 1 has 31 days and 2 has 30 days. That means the very last day my visa was valid was December 6th. So the error the bank made on my birthday was changing my birthday from the 7th month, 12th day, July 12th, to the 6th month, June, the 12th day, 6/12. Last day of my visa when I get back, the day after the last day of Mercury retrograde is the 6th day, and the last day on my visa is the 6th day of December, the inverse of the error the bank made on my birthday, 6/12, 12/6, okay? It's little things like this, folks, that remind us that we live in a spiritual reality. This was a very crass example I chose, okay? But I chose it because it just happened. It just happened 3 weeks ago. I've been involved in a spiritual life for, about 33, 34 years. I started very young. Completely rejected my birth religion of Catholicism. I was much more interested in the inner life as it was taught in India and China through Taoism and things like this. But it doesn't matter. Right? Different paths work for different people. There's no one path that's the best. We just all have our own way, right? I was really mentally obtuse. I needed to see some phenomenon before I could buy into this whole spiritual reality stuff. So that's my story about living in a spiritual reality. So we all live in a spiritual reality. And after a break, and Gaz, I'd like about 6 or 7 minutes of music, please, I'll go back to this idea of the external imprint we're receiving from this institutionalized world that we're living in. So Gaz, if you want to just let me know when I've got my 6 or 7 minutes to start the music, and then I'll text you when I'm ready to go back on air, okay? I'm not sure that Gaz is there.
Also.
More about gel coat. When the fourth round would...
Don't you call in the...
More importantly, he knew what he was talking about.
Oh, does it look good already? Okay. Jumbo Scampi for limited.
All for a price that will make you...
How the hell am I supposed to pay?
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to People for People Radio, the voice of truth in Scotland.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people, and so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate. Only the unloved hate. The unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Fantastic. And welcome back, folks. I am Bruce MacDonald, and this is Imago. Every Tuesday from whatever time it is where you are, but from my end, it's 3 to 5. I'm Central Time. So I was talking in the first hour about a number of things, but, it seems like I'm bobbing and weaving, but I'm actually telling a story in a very straight line. And what I'm talking about here is this structured world we've created and the obfuscation of a spiritual reality by an over buildup of the mental aspect of the human being. Now, please, for the love of God, do not confuse what I'm saying with anything stupid like I want to go back to starting fire with sticks. I mean, I am talking on a computer. I do have a smartphone. I do enjoy technology. But I do believe that the principal goal of the system that we're being fit into is to attack the growth of spiritual consciousness in human beings. Whoever is running this show, they like it when we're dumb. Now, you can get into all the yogic stuff, and you can get into all of the occult stuff if you want. They absolutely love that. But they seem to be particularly opposed to anything that's truly spiritual and centered in love. And you may find my perspective a little bit jaded, but I don't think so. I don't think so at all. It's been one of the best shows I did. I believe it's still up on the Mixcloud for People for People. The last time I was on this station was a show that was titled 3 Generations, and I documented what had been done to the human race in 3 generations, which is 120 years, 40 years for a generation. And the changes we've undergone are absolutely staggering. You would think an extraterrestrial species came in here and changed our timeline. It's not unthinkable when you look at the radical amount of change we've undergone. And we've become a very, very mental people, and this is not good. And it's most acute in the first world. And the first world is where all of the fear is now. It's where all of the weapons are being built. Like China's catching up quite nicely. but it seems to be really centered in our world, the Western world, the English-speaking, formerly Christian world. And fear and constantly worrying about things is one of the expectations of a spiritually imbalanced person. The spiritually balanced person. Now, spiritually balanced just means like what I just told you about the story that happened to me December 5th. We live in a spiritual reality, meaning that everything happens for a reason. Don't get yourself all bent out of shape as your life unfolds. It's, there's no such thing as tragedy, okay? Tragedy is spiritual pornography. It only appears to be tragic from the limited human consciousness that observes the human events. Oh, Bruce, that's tragic. Is it? Is it really? 1,000 people were killed in a tsunami. That's tragic. Is it? Do you know what happened to those 1,000 people? Do you know where they are now? Do you know what became of their consciousness? Is it sad for the family left in their loss? Yeah, it's definitely sad. But tragedy is spiritual pornography. The first psyop pulled on us by the Greeks, by the way. Tragedy is spiritual pornography. This world works the way it does, and the things that happen for reasons that are not accidents. There's not a thing happening in this world that is really random. It may appear random, but it's not random. Now, this does not mean that everything's on a roller coaster track and you don't have to do anything in life. Each and every one of us in our lifetimes is given a set of decisions to make. And the outcome of our story, as it's been pre-planned before we're born, will be dramatically changed by the decisions we make while we're alive. But those are decisions we decided to put in front of ourselves before we came here. I know this is a crazy concept for a lot of people, and I'll move away from that a little bit. It's a bit too spiritually abstract to get up to the causal plane there, especially after my December 5th story just dealt with all the astral stuff. But the point is, we live in a spiritual reality. Now, if you were to look at the world's scriptures, and I've taken a good look at most of them, it's been a passion of mine for some 3 decades. There's hardly a book of substance in the spiritual library this human race has created that I have not taken a look at. And you can put me to the test on that anytime. I'm the kind of guy that can get into a cab in Toronto with a Sikh driver and absolutely stun him to the point where he has to pull over talking about the Japji, their sacred book. How do you know the Japji? Well, I read it. How do you know the Bhagavad Gita? I read it. Whoa, how do you know that Jewish people really hate Jesus? I read the Jerusalem Talmud. All of this stuff is available. The whole world doesn't happen on your smartphones and your computers, folks. Before all that, we had these things called books. We had this thing called text, and you could read things. And I highly recommend you do that. I highly recommend you don't give up reading as we get into this crazy new age of rapid information transference through YouTube and all of these sorts of things, and the minimalized kind of glyph language that's come about by thumb typing on telephones. It's a little bit sad for a lover of the language like myself to watch it just degraded, debased, and prostituted this way by technology, but alas, it's 2018 and I can't change the world. Now, the really big question is, assuming I'm correct that the overtly mental world, the profound external imprinting, obfuscates our spiritual reality, and more than obfuscates it, for those of us whose spiritual reality persists despite all the countermeasures by the government and their institutions, like the education system, the medical system, the financial system, and all of their other systems, if the garden of spirituality begins to grow inside of you, you're going to keep really quiet about that for quite a while, because you're going to wonder if you're crazy or not, because that's what the external imprint is telling people. Oh, Bruce is talking about a prophetic dream. That's dangerously close to the American Diagnostic Manual's definition of schizophrenia. Well, yeah, they're right. And that's not to be dismissed, because for those of you who have schizophrenic friends, and I do, good friends I've spent thousands of hours with over years talking, really integral parts of my life, what you'll notice is these moments of brilliance where they seem to draw information from another world, and then these moments of absolute incompetence where they can, suffer from incontinence and wet their bed or have a temper tantrum so explosive that they need to be sedated and institutionalized for a week. So in many ways, schizophrenia is the failed spiritual consciousness. It's what's going on in the schizophrenic mind is more than the sensory and mental. But unfortunately for them, they can't balance the emergence of this higher consciousness into them, or it happened in a very, very sudden way, and that can be quite imbalancing too. I think we've all heard the stories of people being imbalanced for quite a while after one ayahuasca or one ibogaine trip, both of which is legal down here, by the way, ibogaine and ayahuasca. So I advocate the slow unfoldment of consciousness through regular practice. I really do. There is no quick way. If in 3 or 5 years they have a pill that says that it can give you trans-dimensional consciousness, you're going to be able to read your Akashic records, you're going to see all your past lives, blah, 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 blah. You can talk to your dead relatives. Bruce MacDonald's advice, do not take that pill, because the nature of consciousness is gentle unfoldment, right? So if they do create such a pill, it will be to consciousness development what Monsanto is to food, okay? There will be side effects. It will not be good for you, and the net result will be negative. It won't be positive. And this is another big mistake we have and people are crying to get out of this mental construct, right? Especially in the Western world and all of its confusion. It's transgender, and I'll use my own home country of Canada as an example. A child as young as 8 years old now can request hormone therapy for gender changing without consent of parents. Canada is considering allowing euthanasia of minors without consent of parents. And for those of you who are thinking, this is some poor child stricken with leukemia who's fought the good fight for 3 years and just doesn't have the energy anymore, no, my dear listener, I assure you this could come about in a normally physically healthy child who expresses chronic depression to a psychiatrist. He can make a petition to have his life ended through euthanasia. These are the kinds of things we're discussing in Canada. It's absolutely disgusting, and it's part of an attempted cull of the white race. There is undoubtedly an attempted cull of the white race going on right now. It probably will not work, but it's creating a lot of confusion, a lot of confusion in a lot of people. And a lot of weakness in people. There's a lot of weakness in the white race right now. We've been lulled into this fairyland where, everybody's eating, green weed fluid for breakfast, and, no protein, and as pale as a vampire, and as skinny as a concentration camp survivor. And it's not good, folks. Not good. Not when the rest of the world is firmly ensconced in traditional cultures like Hinduism and Muslim and Chinese communism or Confucian Taoism, Buddhism, and living traditional values. We've made extreme changes to our culture in a very, very fast way, and I do not think that these things were done for our benefit. Getting back to my main question. Is this being done deliberately? Is this slow killing of the white race or attempted killing of the white race being done deliberately? Yes, it absolutely is. It's not just the white race. It's really about our culture, which is the Western culture, right? which, let's be honest, has become a despiritualized, atheistic, indulgent, consumeristic, materialistic culture, which, looked upon from the vantage point of any traditional culture, could easily be seen as so sick it needs to be put down. And we are a sick people. We are a sick culture. We've managed to literally fulfill T.S. Eliot's Hollow Men, poem. We are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, headpiece filled with straw. Alas, when we speak, our voices are quiet and meaningless, like wind through dry grass or rat's feet over broken glass. I can't believe I remembered that. But there you go, a little T.S. Eliot, one of the last sane Englishmen I can vouch for. And something is going terribly wrong here, folks. Now, because this is my first show of the year and I've committed to being positive, I'm going to try and spend the rest of the show talking about solutions, okay? Number one, if I'm correct, and there's no guarantee I am because I can't prove it. And let me go on another little tangent here, okay? One of the great errors made in the alternative media is the vanity of alternative theories, all right? We can all agree that what happened on 9/11 was not the product of 19 Saudi hijackers in 2 planes. It's literally impossible from a grade 8 perspective if you have that much intelligence and education. It just literally could not be done that way. Those planes could not have brought down those buildings. But keep in mind that the people who brought down those buildings control all forensics. That means that all of the rubbish from those buildings coming down was gathered up and carted off and put on boats and sent to a landfill in China. You may ask why, and that would be an excellent question. And I would have to say to you, my dear listener here at People for People Radio, I don't know. Other than the obvious, it's a great way to put evidence so far away nobody can ever see it. It's in a foreign jurisdiction. Now, why do I call the rubble evidence? Well, if there were nuclear devices in the basement, there would be a radioactivity. If there were special high-end explosives made from, let's say, some of the scientific military research centers like North Carolina or Liverpool, England, it would show up. You could do chemical analysis on the rubble and the chemicals would show up and they would be like a fingerprint. You could actually name if you're high enough up the military ladder and you're a scientist, by analyzing that rubbish, you could actually name the particular lab the chemical explosive was made in. So specific are these things now, okay? So it's all forensics. We don't have access to the forensics. So let's say some very clever fellow out there gets about 80% right. And he's starting to win a lot of people over. And he's going, hey man, this is plausible. Even people who don't normally entertain conspiracy theories or an opinion of their own government so negative that they could do this, the story is so compelling and the evidence and the theory presented is so compelling that people are drawn into it. Well, when the powers that be, the people who actually brought down the buildings, see this, they look at their catalog of forensics, they find the one thing that can poke a hole in the theory, and they let it leak out into the public, and everybody is ashamed of themselves for believing in conspiracy theories. And that's the point. So the conspiracy theory is something that should be avoided at all cost. What should not be avoided is the articulation of the fact that the public narrative is incorrect and implausible. I don't have an alternative narrative, but what we're being told is a lie, and here's why it's a lie. Avoid giving the alternative media because it's one of the snares that the other side puts out there for us, okay? And there's just no end of people in YouTube and in the alternative communication world who spend an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out what happened. Well, you don't have the forensics. You can't figure it out. Leave it alone, okay? But what we can do is point out that the plausible story is, the stated story is implausible, and then a full stop should come in there and we should not go any further. So we can well and safely assume that at least 20-25% of what we call medicine has been militarized now as well, meaning it's part of a hidden agenda to mind control us, to weaken the divine spark in us. I see my pictures at this area just above my nose bridge between my two eyes. Some people call that the pineal gland. I don't know if that's got anything to do with it or not. I don't get into the anatomy of it. I'm a human being. I'm in this body. I see my inner pictures where I see my inner pictures. I don't need to map it out to an anatomy. It's not important to me. I just stay with what works. Fish doesn't need to know how it swims. It just needs to be able to swim. Human being doesn't need to know all of the deconstructive elements of what it is to be human. We just need to be able to be human and to act human. And that's what's under attack, is being human. Because the natural disposition of a human being is love and trust. And we're being put into an environment where we can't love and we can't trust. It's very difficult. And it begins right where we live, what we consume. The fluids we consume, the water we consume, the food we consume. So what is the solution, or the beginning of a solution to this problem? It certainly can be summed up in one word, and that is autonomy. Okay? Look at the crazy, wimpy little creatures we've become, we human beings. Look at how spiritually emaciated we've become, how ridiculously comical we've become. It's a joke. You think of what human beings had to do to get to this point. You know, you go back a couple hundred years. I'll use my girlfriend's family as an example. There's 12 kids in the family, but there were actually 18. 6 died in birth. So and those were all home births, not hospital births up here on the mountain. So you've got about a 1/3 infant mortality rate, right? But 12 kids were born up here. Now, the idea of something like that is there were actually 18, 6 died. World Westerner right now. The idea of giving birth out of a hospital is absolutely shocking to people. Well, I mean, what the hell have we been doing for the thousands and thousands and thousands of years we've been on this planet, right? Millions of years we've been on this planet. These things always didn't exist. And the human race had the strength to get through these things because they had a little bit of the spiritual spark and the grace, because it's a natural part of life unless it's deliberately obfuscated by an external imprint, right? So this is to say that they're trying to kill the God within us, however you define that God. Buddhist enlightenment, talking to your ancestors, journeying out of your body, getting guidance like I got on December 5th. I now think it's a good thing I didn't cross the border, that something bad would have happened to me on the other side. I think I was being protected. All of these sorts of things, right? And the funny thing is, folks, when you go and you read the biography of anyone who does anything kind of remarkable in life, you'll see this spiritual spark alive in them, you know. Any one of them, you know, they ask Nikola Tesla, where do you get your ideas? He says, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I believe I'm getting them from extraterrestrials who communicate to me telepathically. Schizophrenic. 2018 definition, schizophrenic. But this so-called schizophrenic created things that are so unbelievable they haven't been released to this day. You know, that because they would liberate us, okay? This is another thing that's going on now in our timeline, is that the next phase of technology coming to us liberates us, meaning that the energy we use will be indefinite, limitless, and portable, okay? We're no longer going to be dependent on gas stations and hydro stations. Well, that's a pretty bitter pill to swallow for a group of human beings who've been doing nothing more than setting up toll booth economies for themselves. You know, the monthly billing that just keeps putting money, billions and trillions, into their pocket. How do you get that cheddar if people are liberated? You don't. So the beginning is autonomy. You have to become autonomous. There's no way for me to measure how much my health has improved as a result of living up here and growing my own food and harvesting my own animals and drinking mountain water from a stream. There's absolutely no way for me to quantify that. I can tell you I feel fantastic. I can tell you that at 52 I feel like I'm 37 or 38. I can tell you that I can walk 15 kilometers through these mountains, and any of you listening to me in a modern North American or European city right now, you might last 1.5 kilometers. You have to build up. These hills are brutal. Some of them go up as steep as a Black Diamond ski run, which is an expert run for those of you who don't ski. I don't anymore myself. Haven't for a number of years, but as a young man I did in my native Ottawa. So autonomy is the key to liberating yourself from this system. I started to get the message about 7 or 8 years ago. Well, was it that? Yeah. Around 2009, 2010, I started to look at cob building, log cabins, earthbag, rammed earth, all of these alternative forms of building that primarily used the material readily available in any land you would buy, whether you buy your land in Arizona or Northern Ontario or the Talamanca Mountains. And I had this idea of building a home and being able to live comfortably and to not have all of the bills of North America and all of the tension of North America. You know, it's funny when I go home now. As I said earlier in this show, I was back in Canada from about July 14th to September 7th, and I spent my time between Ottawa and Toronto. The first thing I noticed was how difficult it was to hook up with people. Right? Let's grab a coffee. It's been a while. It was like everybody is like trying to nail down the president now to get 5 minutes of the president or prime minister's time. Everybody's that busy. Everybody's that stretched thin. Everybody is that stressed out, you know? And so it's hang on, I got it. I'll get to that later. So autonomy is really, I think, the way to go. And what happens is you end up controlling all parts of your life, including the food that goes into you. I can tell you the people up here are much healthier, okay? And they're all living till their 80s and 90s, and they're smoking tobacco, and they're drinking, and they're doing stuff that if they didn't do, they'd all be centenarians. Just like the native woman I'm going to interview. And another thing I noticed was I feel differently now. Partly it's due to me and what I ate when I was staying back in Canada. You know, I ate a lot of processed food, like breakfast cereals, like Frosted Flakes and Cheerios and stuff like that. And that stuff's really, really bad for you. You really shouldn't be eating anything that really you can't readily identify its organic principle, where it came from and what it is. If it's been transfigured or transmuted to such an extent that you can't even recognize what it is anymore, or you couldn't replicate it outside the formula that McCain Foods uses to make tater tots or something, probably, folks, you shouldn't be eating it. You should not be eating it. So the food is toxic, the water is toxic, the medicine is toxic, everything is toxic. Another thing I'm learning about the natives up here is they have remedies for everything, okay? So when you're living in the tropics, one of the things that happens is I don't mean to gross people out, but it hasn't happened to me yet, but you get parasites, right? You'll go number 2 one day, and you're going to see worms in the toilet bowl, okay? Now, the Costa Ricans, they go to the doctor and they get a medicine that cleans out their stomach. The natives, they do it all with this, I forget the name of it, this super bitter leaf. Like anything that happens in this environment to the body, the natives have figured out the remedy with plants within 100 meters of where they live. And it's my understanding after talking to these people and relating the information to other friends I have, including native friends in North America, that the principle of holistic healing is if you're living in a natural environment, okay? So there's nothing holistic about getting into a car crash. Human beings built cars. Nature has no remedy for a car crash. So for trauma-based medicine, the Western allopathic model is quite good, but it's only relevant to the world they live in, right? For anything related to the body that could kill you, like a snake bite, like parasites, or anything like this, the natives have a remedy. And they say that the remedy to everything is always within a few meters of where the problem arose. So, and apparently this is true, that if you're even in a North American forest and you go through poison ivy, if you were to look around and you knew how to identify it, there's another plant within 2 or 3 meters that is the remedy to poison ivy. Okay? So there's all this balance and symmetry. Again, it's nature telling us we live in a constructed and designed environment, okay? Just like the spiritual consciousness and the spiritual reality I alluded to in the earlier part of the show. And this is all being taken away now. And one of the reasons they want to take it away is if we can take care of ourselves, they can't make any money off of us. And that's all they're about now, is making money off of us. The worst of them are really bad. We know who they are. I won't go into any great detail. Hopefully Trump will be arresting a lot of them. But underneath them, there's another class of people that are really about, 50% of the malignancy and really quite disgusting, right? Like, think about the vast government bureaucracy that exists, using Canada as an example, a billion-some-dollar budget for the Ministry of Native Affairs. Well, why not just give the money directly to the natives? Why do we need a bunch of European people with master's degrees getting guaranteed annual salaries and a guaranteed lifelong pension when they retire? Why are we commodifying their misery or whatever aid or debt we owe these people? These, and I don't mean to sound too right-wing when I say this. It isn't really a left-right issue. But if you study it closely, bureaucracies are really almost always a commodification of problems. And then, whatever it may be. Look at policing and justice, for example. It's outrageous. And another thing that's happening in our society, as I remember based on saying out loud policing and justice, we're getting to a point in the life cycle and debt cycle of the Western world where the liberal democracy can't survive. Okay? We have serial killers that go through the penal system and the justice system with all of their appeals and everything using public funds for their legal defense. We spend millions of dollars giving serial killers the right to appeal court decisions. Okay? We spend all kinds of money in our justice system. So Toronto is Toronto, the main city, not the greater Toronto area, is this, and all urban centers are pretty much like this now. You got the greater Chicago area, and basically it's a downtown core and a bunch of satellite cities that used to be suburbs, but they got so big they're their own cities now. What happens is, so the budget for the Toronto Police Force in US dollars for 2015 was $1.2 billion. And that's 2.5 million people in the city of Toronto. And then on top of that, you got the jail system. I don't know how much that costs. You've got the legal aid system. I don't know how much that costs. You've got the court system, and I'm not sure how much that costs. But it's a lot of money for all of these things, right? A lot of money. Here's the polar opposite. And I know a lot of people aren't going to like to hear this, and I'm not advocating it. I'm just using it as an example to demonstrate the absurdity of the liberal democracy, okay? All of this money and all of these people, these have all become regulated economies now. We have people who are going through law school who are going to make 80% of their lifetime income from the general tax purse through legal aid, right? Which I think is $125 an hour now in Canada. And in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, which is about 7.9 million people, about 3.5 times the size of Toronto. I'm not sure what their policing budget is, but I'd suggest it's probably under 50 million US per year. They don't really need a lot of police because they live under Sharia law. Now, say what you will about this. I don't want to live under Sharia law, but I'm just using it as the counterweight, the counterpoint, the white dot in the black circle to give you the contrast, okay? You could give an 8-year-old child a bag of gold coins in a translucent or a transparent plastic bag. You could literally put $500,000 worth of gold in that kid's hands. He could walk through the downtown center of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, holding that transparent bag of gold coins in front of him, with no security, no adult with him, completely on his own. He could go through the worst parts of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Nobody would steal the gold from the kid. Think about that, okay? Now, the juxtaposition is the millions of dollars we spend in the appeals and legal defenses of serial killers like Paul Bernardo, okay? So we fail to see and we fail to remember that the liberal democracy is extremely expensive, okay? And the system we live under now is going to go through a shock. There's going to be an interruption of our system. Nobody knows how it's going to go down. Everybody uses different language. Some people will say, oh, there's going to be an economic reset. Yay! Okay, map that out for me. So if you've been diligently working for 25, 30 years and you're 56 about to take an early retirement and you've got 5.2 million in the bank in Canadian dollars and you've been saving your whole life and been quite successful at it, if we reset to a different currency, how does that work? Do you get what you worked for? Okay? And how do you do that overnight? And now considering that the place that is considering the reset, the United States, and this is coming up more and more now as Donald Trump begins to wade into the U.S. Federal Reserve as a source of misery for the United States. And, you know, thank you, President Trump, for doing that, because he's absolutely correct. But what I don't see is the reparation system. I don't see how you go from that to a new system without a protracted period of martial law. And then as soon as you bring the National Guard or the soldiers out, and coincidentally they all got called back, didn't they? As soon as you bring them out, then all the liberals go, oh, this is the right-wing coup Bill Maher was warning us about on Real Time with Bill Maher. And what MSNBC was telling us about, and this and that, and this and that. And like, it's no matter how you look at it, it's going to be chaotic. Okay? There's no way this can be a smooth transition. There's never been smooth transitions, okay? You know, there was no smooth transition from the fall of the Berlin Wall into the capital system that Russia now occupies. Hundreds of thousands of Russians died. It's not in the news. You don't know about it. There was no smooth transition from laissez-faire communism to we're fully communist now in the Cultural Revolution, which began in August 1966 in China. Tens of millions of people died. What happens, folks, is that when you build out big, complex, urban-centered systems that are centered on cities, centered on transportation, and most importantly, consistent supply chains, it's very difficult to change those things. The logistics is so tied up, okay? Think about the logistics of a 72-hour supply chain at your local grocery store in Colorado or Toronto or Los Angeles. And that's what they're all on now. They're on 72-hour supply chains. So if they don't get food in 72 hours, the shelves are empty, right? How do the trucks run if there's no gas, right? There's so many things. How do you pay for the gas? How do you maintain the roads? Well, right now it's all done with this thing called the US dollar, which everyone's talking about resetting, right? What do you do with your debtors? What do you do with China? What do you do with Japan? What do you do with your domestic debtors? Social Security, right? All of those things are going to go away. And I'm not trying to be the voice of doom. I told you I was going to try and do a positive show. I told you I was going to try and do that. And I'm not trying to be the voice of doom. But if you think the Canada Pension Plan and the U.S. Social Security is going to be solvent in the next 3 or 4 years, I got a big wake-up call for you. It's probably not. Now, are they going to throw something else into place? Is Donald Trump going to revitalize the local, American farming, or under martial law take over Monsanto? Are you going to do like the British in World War II and go to the local high school gymnasium to get your weekly rationing of butter and salt and lard and sugar and tea and coffee? Is that how it's going to work? Somebody please explain to me how this reset is going to smoothly transition us into this cosmic 5D consciousness the New Agers in alternative radio are talking about. Can you map that out for me in a step-by-step way? Because I just don't see it. And the human being as an animal and as a consciousness is about the most savage and primitive it's been in all of its history, despite the trappings of civilization and the illusion of civility, right? Just look at road rage as an example. How are people going to behave when there's a supply chain interruption and they can't feed their kids? What are the people on the 24-hour economy, the junkies, going to do when they can't get high? About 80% of Americans and Canadians are on a 30-day economy, meaning if anything happened to the mother or father, if there was any interruption to their income and no insurance company to back them up, they're screwed. They're screwed. And I would remind people that there was no bailout for the people who lost their homes in 2008. Municipalities went into debt to borrow the money to demolish the homes, because they were a toxic threat. They didn't all sit down and have a powwow and figure out a way to get people back into the homes. They went into debt to physically destroy existing homes as tent cities and homelessness was growing an epidemic. Let that be a cautionary tale to you. Do you think it's going to be any smoother? You think Donald Trump's going to set tents up with the National Guard and make big pots of chili every day to feed people the way the Amish did during the Winnipeg floods a decade and a half ago? No! It's not going to go down that way. No one's going to take care of you but yourself. Only you and the people who care about you, the people who are in a dependent relationship with you. Your family, your blood. But look at the disintegration of family in North American culture now. Right? They called the 70s the me generation. This generation, I guess, is the me generation. Nobody commits to anything. And we're all about to learn, not all of us, because I'm already out. I was listening to Barbara Three Crow. She's got her farm set up. Smart woman. She got the inner direction. She sees it. Okay? I'm not trying to scare you folks. But, somebody needs to grab you by the coat lapel and give you a shake. Government ain't going to save this. The Rock is not going to swoop down in a helicopter and save you. Sylvester Stallone's not going to kill all the bad people in Detroit. Not going to save you. Nobody's going to save you. You got to look at this realistically. You got to see what's coming, and you got to be prepared for it. Department of Homeland Security has already said every American should be prepared to go 6 months without electricity. Why would they publicly announce that 6 weeks ago? What's going on with all these roaming 911 blackouts? Again, I'm not even going to try and answer it because I take my own advice. I don't have a theory, which would be a conspiracy theory. I only note what's going on. That's all you can do is note what's going on. And everything around you right now is telling you to be in a secure place where you can survive autonomously. If your family has land, start setting it up. Get your salt and pepper in there. Get some food in there. Get a 25-kilogram bag of rice in there. Get a bunch of beans in there. Get food you can survive on for months. Get a bunch of firewood cut for the winter. Because you're not going to cut it in your Chicago apartment or condo. You're not going to make it in your Toronto home. Anyways, this is what I see coming, okay? And this is what happens, okay? Because we live in a spiritual reality. And when one side gets out of hand, it rebalances itself. So maybe Trump and his team have come in to rebalance an egregious imbalance, but you got to pay for the sin. You got to pay the karma. The karma is you're there now, and you didn't have the internal guidance to get out of there. There's going to be a big debt owed. It's going to be very, very traumatic. Very traumatic for a lot of people. A lot of people are already going through it. You might want to do yourself a favor and look at anything that's been done for the people who were affected by Hurricane Michael in Florida. Huge tent cities, okay? Everyone in the world was at the front of the list to be helped by the liberals, the Democrats in the United States. Honduran migrants. I'll tell you right now, a Honduran with 2 hectares or 5 acres of land has a hell of a lot of a better and a safer life than a lot of Americans as America is going through this transition right now. Because Americans don't have land anymore. Don't worry about the Hondurans. They have more going on in Honduras than you guys have going on in the United States now. Don't worry about the North Africans if you're in Greece or Italy. They have enough to help them get by in North Africa. They don't need to be there. Anyways, that's about it for today. Hopefully Gaz was able to record this show. He wasn't able to record last week's show. Summing up the show, folks, change is upon us. The winds of change are blowing now. The winds of change are blowing now. Get your sails up, get your ship pointed in the right direction, get yourself into a situation where you can weather this reset, which would be the most benign interpretation of what's coming. That's what you want to do. You want to get yourself set up, okay? And it's going to come down to this. It's going to come down to food and shelter. And the sad reality is most North Americans now, unless they're living rurally in Canada or the United States, most urban North Americans now are on a 30-day economy. They do not have the savings to survive a 60, 90, 120-day supply chain shortage in which there's mass unemployment. And, of course, what's going to happen if there's a supply chain interruption? All right? The price of food is going to go through the roof, okay? You're already seeing that, I think, in North America, right? Go to the store and buy yourself a Granny Smith apple and see how much that costs you, okay? So this is just me trying to give you some good counsel, folks. And I took my own good counsel 7 years ago, and much like when Noah was building his ark, people laughed at me. Nobody's laughing anymore. I get like a dozen emails a day. Hey, you got space over there? No, sorry, man. I don't. I really don't have space over here. I can't have 100 people come over here. You know, you knew I started this project in like 2012. Like, you know, why didn't you get in earlier? Why, you know, I mean, there's no such thing as an insurance policy after you've crashed your car, folks. You got to get the policy before you crash the car, right? And that's the difference between insurance policies and spiritual guidance. I love you all. I hope this hasn't been too harsh. And remember, tragedy is spiritual pornography. You live in a spiritual reality, and everything happens for a reason. And you're an immortal being. And I love you, and we should all love each other. I'm Bruce MacDonald. This is Imago. Thank you for spending 2 hours with me. Good evening, good afternoon, good day, folks.
Also,
More about gel coat. When the fourth round...
Don't you call in the...
More importantly, he knew what he was talking about.
oh, does it look good already? Okay. Jumbo Scampi for limited.
All for a price that will make you...
How the hell am I supposed to pay?
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to People for People Radio, the voice of truth in Scotland.